Thank you very much. I want to sort of restate the obvious, but also I want to thank Rabbi Nu and Neshamos. It's a wonderful organization. We're very honored to be partnering with you. And also give another plug for the toolkit, which I was at a less of a role with, but I did participate. Toolkit is really a remarkable accomplishment. So remarkable that I don't think it's been put on the chat yet. So David, if you can just double check and make sure that it gets up. Nobody sees it in the chat.
It's there. It's the first. It's the first. First.
Not an hour. You may have to re-enter it. A few people have commented it's not there. I can't find it. And
all right.
so
you can't find it.
It might be like going before the Bays and Bereshis. And so if you can please make sure to put it up there, because it's a really great resource and you can't beat the price. So welcome everybody, please take advantage of it. I'm gonna, okay, here we go.
As you see it?
Okay. Now, okay. I'm gonna actually work with the PowerPoint. So give me a second to get it up on the screen. Okay, is that clear? Have you see it, David? Is it on? Okay,
it's good. Great. Looks good. Looks good.
It looks good. Yeah, right. Somehow or another, you could say the same thing without a PowerPoint. You don't sound as intelligent. By the way, this suits me fine because I'm going to be talking the more theoretical. And very often when I talk theoretical, then people say, well, what do I do? So thanks to Rachel and the Corona Mora, I'm absolved of that because I'm going to come up with some very nice theories and thoughts. And she's really going to give you sort of the hands-on. And we presented many times together, and it's really a treat. So let me just talk about what topics we're going to be covering, and maybe some of you feel like this fellow in the desert, you are here. We're going to talk about the unique stress of the unknown, what secondary trauma is, how the trauma that we get from being around other people who are traumatized, how do you addressing one's own anxiety first, which is very important for teachers in terms of what the old metaphor of putting the oxygen on yourself first. And then we're going to talk about the kind of new approach we have today, which is sort of emphasizing action over outcome. We'll talk about self-care, and if there's time, what is this new world? Throw out some ideas about what is this new world that we're coming into. Okay, so first of all, the unknown. The unknown is in and of itself highly stressful. In fact, sometimes more so than unambiguous awareness of tragedy. I think the best example is something that I know we in the trauma team at Ohel have had to deal with a lot is, again, I have to say a big lo aleinu, but imagine people who may have had treatments for a cancer, may have had a surgery to remove a tumor. And the very big question is, has the cancer spread to the lymph nodes? Has this cancer spread? And the tests results for that may take about a week or two until they come. And sometimes even when the results of the test are tragic, in other words, even when the results indicate that indeed, yes, the cancer has spread, many people have told us that was easier to deal with than that week or two of waiting. That not knowing or the uncertainty that is bred is very nerve-wracking, and all the more so today, because we live in the age of technology. And in the age of technology, we're used to finding out everything with just a click of the mouse. I mean, some of you have heard me speak before. I often talk about the technology revolution. We don't have time to go into that now, but technology is not just having more computers and having access online. It has changed the mindset, the culture. It has changed the way children are. It has changed physician-patient relationships. And in today's world, we very naturally expect to find out everything immediately. That's why we have this concept today of the helicopter parents. And as you can see, there's an example of the helicopter parent support group. Why we have, do parents love their children more today than they did in the past? That's not the case. Because we have technology, because we have immediate access to any place in the globe, because we have nannycams and other kinds of devices, there's a natural expectation, especially from younger parents today, that they're going to know every minute of everything that's going on with their child. And so too, we're used to that. If something happens, we will Google it and get immediate answers and results. But that's not been the case with Corona. Even the biggest experts, and we're moving along, but many of even the top medical experts are very confounded and confused by what's going on. There's a lot we don't understand, and we don't understand what's coming down the pike. And this is very unnerving. And this alone, putting aside the potential danger, and fear of the coronavirus, this alone can be terribly destabilizing to ourselves as the providers and teachers, and to the students as well. So it's very hard to predict the future. We don't know what's coming. We don't know what to expect. So I like to quote the great theologian and philosopher, Yogi Berra. He has 3 quotes here about the future. One is, it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. The other one is, the future ain't what it used to be. And the third is, if you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else. It's very similar to the famous Alice in Wonderland line, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And that's very true today about the situation is, as we open up schools today, we don't know what the school year is going to look like. We don't know if we're going to get through the year, if there will be a vaccination, and we'll be able to put this whole corona thing behind us. Will there be a resurgence, God forbid? And we'll have to shut down schools again and resort back to Zoom learning. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's uncertain, and therefore that's going to make it much more difficult for us to prepare and cope with the school year as it emerges. Now, let me talk about what secondary trauma is, and I'm going to give this as my definition, but I'll explain it first outside, and we'll look at it. It's sometimes called secondary trauma, sometimes called vicarious trauma. Sometimes it's called compassion fatigue. I don't like that term because I don't think you fatigue from being compassionate. I think if anything, it's energizing. But secondary trauma is a fascinating area in trauma, which it is the trauma of the person who attends to the person who's been traumatized, or who may be reading about it or find out about it at some later date. There we go. One second. I'm sorry. So so for example, if there's a car accident and the person in the car accident who may be injured, that person is experiencing primary trauma. The Hatzalah driver who comes to the scene, the emergency room doctor who attends to the person's injuries, is experiencing secondary trauma. And the person who reads about it in the newspaper is also potentially experiencing secondary trauma. In other words, we connect to people who experience trauma, and as a result, we sort of experience the trauma ourselves. I'm just gonna take a quick look at the chats to see if any of them, okay, no, this is all good. All right. So just, 1 second, let me go back to that. So let me just sort of read the definition. Okay, so secondary vicarious trauma is the assault on the equanimity and perception of safety and predictability of the care provider for the primary victim of tragedy or loss. The provider in turn responds as if traumatized him or herself. So in other words, what happens is that the person who's experiencing the secondary trauma actually has trauma symptoms. So it's as if the trauma is contagious, as if the trauma comes and assaults the person himself who is actually assisting or reading or finding out about the trauma. So if I translate that into the situation that teachers are going to be in, if there is a student in their class who is sick, or has a parent who's ill, or has a grandparent or a parent who died, their reaction, or your attending to their needs, will cause you yourself to experience trauma and grief. So we've identified 2 areas that are contributing to the potential trauma for the teacher. One is the ambiguity, and the other is being around the kids who are experiencing such scary situations, besides what you might be going through yourself. Now, here's the basic point, and I think the basic premise of what we're talking about is, and this is the old, metaphor that you hear on the airplane: put the oxygen on yourself first, and then put it on your child. You can't, pour water from an empty vase, or empty pitcher. I mean, you have to be okay before you can be of assistance or help to your students. And so therefore, the first step, and that's why this is our first presentation of the 2 of them, is attend to yourself. Make sure that you're okay. We're going to talk about what that means, because there is a danger. It's not like you're having some irrational response. But it doesn't mean that you have to get rid of it, because we need an element of anxiety. We need that sort of vigilance with what's going on. But there's a very big difference when you're experiencing something traumatic yourself and it's out of control, versus being aware of something to be of concern of, but you're in charge of it. So the very first step is you have to be sort of in charge or at home with the anxiety engendered about teaching in this year with the coronavirus. Now, and again, if the cartoon on the side said you think you and Daddy might be brave enough to sleep in your own bed tonight. Now this is, why does this happen? Why would the anxiety, let's say, of a teacher be so easily, if you will, conveyed or communicated to students? Or why would the anxiety of the students impact on the teacher? And again, if to go back to PowerPoint, having the capacity to rapidly and effectively impart fear and vigilance can be essential to survival. In other words, the way we are made, the way we are wired, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu made us, we can very easily impart anxiety we have to someone else, and that's essential to survival. And let me give you two simple examples. Something we've all experienced. The first time your toddler started wandering into the street, or God forbid, even actually wandered into the street, you scared the living daylights out of that child because you had to, because you want the child from now on to be scared to do something like that. So the fear there is very adaptive. Or for that matter, when we teach children about avoiding strangers or try to impart in them certain type of stranger anxiety, we are making them anxious for their own safety. And therefore the capacity for an adult to impart anxiety over to a child is essential to the child's safety. So therefore, in the right situation, it's essential. And even here, to some extent, it's essential because we want our children to have a modicum of anxiety. We want them to have concern about health and prevention of the spread of an illness. You may have some kids who are very dismissive of it, or maybe just very inattentive. And we want to scare them then. And we may have kids who are so panicky they can't learn. We want to calm them down. But our ability to give over anxiety is essential. And therefore, if we are overwrought, we're going to give it very easily over to our children and to our students. So it's very important that the first place you have to be is in a good place yourself. The other thing that's fascinating about this situation is that it's something we call a shared traumatic reality. I'll just give you an example. I think it was about 2 years ago, the Ohel trauma team went to Malibu to help them after the fire. Or we went to Pittsburgh after the shooting. And it was traumatic for the residents of those towns. And maybe secondarily, we were traumatized, but it wasn't our trauma. We weren't in Pittsburgh during the shooting. Our homes weren't threatened or burned down by a fire. Therefore, we were coming in a way as sort of outsiders, someone removed from the trauma to help them. What we're doing now with our children is a shared traumatic reality. We are also in this traumatic situation. So that creates a very interesting kind of dynamic. And again, speaks to how we have to have ourselves adequately positioned so that we have the right amount of anxiety and not too much, because we're in the same predicament. This also poses a very common question we've been asked is, should we share that with the children? Should we share that we're scared ourselves? My general answer is high school kids, yes, because they're at an age where they can process the fact that protective figures can be scared. Most younger children want to feel that the protective figure is sort of invincible, is strong, and therefore it may not be advisable.
Okay.
Just to quote Harry Stack Sullivan, the founder of the American School of Psychiatry, he says, when doing therapy, there should be only one anxious person in the room, preferably not the therapist. Okay, I'm see, I'm only 5 minutes. Only 5 minutes left. I see somebody like that joke. Okay, so what are we doing today? How has this changed? So again, there's the cartoon says I think we may need to update our disaster recovery plan. This one suggests we all run around in circles shouting, what do we do? What do we do? Now, here's a very, very important point and maybe most essential point that I'm conveying. Until COVID, until March, we had to, as the trauma team, sometimes deal with catastrophes or tragedies. So you might have had to deal with, God forbid, the death of a young parent. We were able to walk into the classroom and say, it's very sad, it's scary, it's rare. It doesn't happen too often. We live in very good times. There's very good health care, very good nutrition. We're not surrounded by enemies who want to, we're going to commit pogroms. So you don't have to be scared because this is a rare occurrence. When COVID hit, we no longer could say that because it was sufficiently frequent that it would be really a disservice to the children to say, this is something rare. So our focus has shifted, and I think it's still our focus now, not so much to guaranteeing a positive outcome, but to focus on what we're doing. We're taking every precautionary measure imaginable. We are following the instructions of the foremost medical experts of our medical team, of the CDC, of the whatever you want to call it, the WHO, whatever it may be. We are doing everything possible to ensure your safety. And if we need to contain our own anxiety and that of the kids that we're taking care of, that's going to be our focus today. It very much fits with the famous line from Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, founder of the Muslim movement, who used to say, Mensch darf tun, nicht auftun. Man has to do, not accomplish. We're focusing much more on what we're doing. So what is self-care? Let me go over it very quickly because I see my time and I don't want to take any time away from Corona Mara. But first of all, know thyself. Know yourself, know your vulnerabilities, keep that, take your pulse. And again, do you have that appropriate level of concern or anxiety? And is it under your sort of management and control? Okay, remind yourself, this is very important, how important you are in your children's lives. You're not just a babysitter. You're having a very important impact on these children. And that may help you tolerate some of the stress and newness of all these kind of precautions that have to be woven into your school schedule. And here's a very important point, is that the research shows that when you go through a crisis with someone, the research, my own experience shows it, when you go through a crisis with someone effectively, you're going to be very cherished by the person. Now, many of us, as we get older, we think back in our childhood, and we might remember our third grade teacher, fourth grade teacher, seventh grade teachers, our 11th grade teachers. Some we remember, some we not remember. I'm telling you that you will effectively help our children get through this very difficult year, and you're going to have a very special place in their memory. And I think you need to hold on to that, because there is something very heroic about what you're doing this year, and that'll make it more manageable for you. Talk out concerns without providing solutions. It's a very important point in any kind of trauma, tension, that you need to talk about it. And the listener doesn't have to give you solutions. Just the opportunity to talk, just to talk how tense you are and how worried you are. And every time a kid coughs, how your heart skips a beat. When you speak it out with your colleagues, with your spouse, with family members, friends, it already feels better, even if they say nothing. Again, obviously, stress inoculation activities, exercise, music, hobbies, and the like, healthy ones, not drinking, not substances, or not screaming at family members, but the healthy ways of reducing stress. Okay, and of course, here we can, it says trust your institution and trust your children's remarkable capacity to adapt. As you can see, this child has developed a very remarkable capacity to adapt. But seriously, we're resilient people, and the children we're teaching. I mean, children's resilience is little less than remarkable. And I often tell people if they're expecting some very difficult times, if someone's going in for some major surgery, or there's something about to happen in a family, and they're worried about their children, I sometimes guarantee them, I said, in a few months, I'm going to call me back and say, I can't believe my kids. I can't believe how they handled it. And children are remarkably adaptable, more so than we are, because they're constantly facing new developmental challenges. So trust them, and trust yourself that you can manage this. I'm just going to very, very quickly reference something that I think is important, which is, I'm giving you like some thought, just food for thought. As we emerge from this, and we will, is the world going to be the same? Are we just going through a bump on the road and we'll go back to the way everything was, which I think a lot of people think? Or is the future going to look different because of what's happening? Are we going to be doing more remote learning? Will we have a very different approach to health and hygiene, et cetera, given what we've been through? So I want to give two very interesting examples of how people were able to change things and their perspective. For years and years and years, people wanted to figure out how to get machines to fly. And they never could until two bicycle repairmen from Dayton, Ohio, invented the airplane. And people say, what was the difference between them and others? And the difference was that other people tried to get machines to fly like a bird. The Wright brothers tried to get a machine to fly like a machine. Similarly, Deep Blue. There for years, people were trying to get a computer program that the masters couldn't beat. And they couldn't. The masters always beat the computer. And the problem was they're trying to get a computer to play chess like a person. When they tried to get the computer, when they invented a computer to play chess like a computer, which was Deep Blue was, it suddenly was unbeatable. So we have to, when we think about remote learning, we think about the new world we're in. It's not just the old world, but using more computers. Maybe we have to start thinking about what's this new world going to start looking like as a result of something so enormous like the current pandemic crisis that we're in. Okay, I overstepped my hospitality. I went a little too long. Let me at this point hand it over to Corona Mora, to Ohel Gross, who's going to give us some sort of more practical and hands-on suggestions.
Thank you, Dr. Blumenthal. I know you mentioned before that we've done a few of these already together, and it's been a real pleasure where you set the stage for you set the why, and I'm hoping to give a little bit of the how. So I just want to start off, obviously, thanking Ohel for inviting me once again to join and offer some ideas. Thank you to Neshamos. This is the first time I'm partnering with you, and it's a true honor, and I'm humbled by the invitation. So to get started, I just want to put it out there that I know we have a lot of teachers and we have a lot of administrators on here tonight. And what COVID has really done in the field of education, it's leveled the playing field, because we are all novices. We are all rookies at this. No one has come in and said, oh, when I led in the pandemic of 1983, because there was none. And in the field of education, this is a first time for everybody. So if you have 2 years of teaching experience or you have 25 years of administrative experience, we're all kind of in this together and figuring it out as we go. So with that, I think we all have to take a deep breath and recognize that no one has the answers, and we're going to do the best that we can. I myself am opening up an elementary school of 400 students on September 8th. I have, out of those 400, 127 families chose to go completely virtual. So essentially I'm opening up 2 schools, brick and mortar and virtual, and just figuring that out and balancing that while maintaining the self-care that Dr. Blumenthal talked about has been a challenge. So I recognize that everyone is arriving today with different challenges. And I also recognize that we have teachers here and administrators here. So before I talk specifically to the teachers or specifically to the administrators, I just want to talk about a concept that I've adopted for myself, and I just want everyone else to consider adopting. And that is that locus of control, right? What we can manage, but by recognizing the macro versus the micro. I, as the principal and the administrator of the building, recognize that I am the macro. I need to focus on the schedules, the protocols, big picture, the cleanliness of the building, where the teachers need to focus on the micro. That is the classroom, the actual students that are going to be in their classroom with them every single day. And it's really important here that everyone kind of focuses on their lane, because I can't put together a really strong schedule and a tight protocol and procedure for entry every day if I'm worried about how the child is going to take on and off their mask when they go to reading group. That I have to trust that my teachers are going to put those protocols in place, and we'll get to that. So if I speak on the macro level first, I'm talking to the administrators, my fellow principals and deans and heads of school who are probably have not slept all summer like myself. You probably dream about your reopening plans. Actually, a funny story, a teacher asked me, do you dream about reopening plans? And I said, don't you have to sleep in order to dream? So I think it's a universal issue that we've all, summer vacation has not been a vacation. So with that in mind, think about, the big picture and what you can put in place for your teachers in order to build trust. So the first thing is that I asked the administrators to do is to adopt this micro and macro kind of approach, that they need to be in charge of the big picture. And it's also about a matter of trust and trusting your staff to follow. But in order for your staff to follow, you need to be explicit and direct. I'll never forget that when I took my CPR course in high school, they always said, when in a crisis, you need to be very specific on who's responsible for what. So if you're doing compressions, you need to say, you in the red shirt, go call 911. And I think that idea is that we have to recognize that in a crisis, we have to be super specific. So if you're assembling your health team, I know I'm assembling multiple people on my health team in the morning to screen the children. I'm not saying, oh, we're all going to be showing up and we're all going to take temperatures. I'm being very specific on who's responsible for what. You are responsible for taking temperature. You are responsible for recording students that need to wait 20 minutes to be retested. You are responsible for taking a child to the office if there's a questionable situation. And putting all of those, very specific jobs in place is a way to take care of yourself, because you're going to be running around like a crazy person on that opening day or 1 week in if you don't delegate appropriately, right? We know an assembly line, instead of everybody doing everything, if everyone does their job well, then you'll have a well-oiled machine. Consider double duty protocols. So I know for myself, when we were setting up the social distancing on our blacktop outside when the kids were coming in, we said, what can we put in place that would work for arrival and dismissal? So it might take a little bit more elbow grease in the beginning, but think about what you can do for double duty. Another example, something as simple as when the kids get their health screening every morning, they're going to have to, the parents have to answer a questionnaire. They're going to have to go through a fever scan. And then we decided, how can we show the teachers and how can we build a level of trust that we are sending healthy kids to their classroom? We are going to either be putting stickers on the students' hands or a little stamp. Think like Adventureland. When you go in, you get a stamp, you get to ride the rides, unlimited. The student arrives to the classroom, they see the stamp, they have a sense of calm that the child went through the screener. And then double duty, we're trying to implement hand washing protocols. The goal will be to get the stamp washed off by the end of the day. So think about double duty procedures on how you can, work smarter and not harder. Set yourself up for school closure now. I can't stress this enough. I know that we are optimistic and we are positive and the kids are going to be healthy and we're going to rock our reopening plans, but we also have to be realistic. If you are, on any news outlet or if you're on social media and you follow educational accounts, you know that there are school closures that are happening nationwide, and not because people are deathly ill, but because there was a case and the Department of Health advised for them to close. So set up your technology from day one. Get parent communication, set that up immediately. Think about what technology or remote learning platforms you can use tidbits of in the classroom so that should you move to full remote, it won't be March all over again. And we all can admit that no matter how strong of an institution you were, that was a pretty dark time. And we don't want to go back there. So knowledge is power, and you know what you need to be successful during a remote plan. So just plan for it now. Expect and know that you're not going to make everybody happy. You have to, plan for the masses. And I think part of that is just really embodying that. I know it's so easy to read an email from a parent or, a frustrated teacher or, a community member and get really, worked up about all of this work that you're putting in. And it's hard. It's hard to build those walls, but you just have to remember that you can't make everybody happy. And also, this is something I'm going to share with you, and I also have to remind myself, and that's the take breaks. Self-care is not all about going for massages and big fancy vacations, but sometimes self-care is saying, I've worked too long on this task. I need to step away and I need to look at it with fresh eyes. I cannot tell you how refreshing it is sometimes to just look at something from a new perspective after a whole night's sleep. I had sat with my physical education schedule for over 3 hours and I could not figure out a problem. Walked away, arrived to it the next morning, and figured it out in a few minutes. And sometimes that's all you need, is just a really good break and to step away. Now I want to switch a little bit to the teachers. So with the teachers, if we adopt that micro and macro approach where, you are trusting your administrators to take care of the macro, you are trusting them that they are putting a strong, efficient, safe plan in place, you can focus on your domain, and that's your classroom, right? That is your four walls where you are in charge and you set the tone and you create the culture. So, I think Dr. Blumenthal talked about that, secondary trauma and how we're all coming to the classroom with, lots of feelings, but it's going to be up to you to set that tone. And if you are exhibiting fear, obviously the children are exhibiting fear. And ways to kind of, I would say, reduce that is to set up, your own protocols in your own domain. So you have to start doing the work now before school starts. Whether it's on chart paper or in a notebook or on a Post-it note, you have to ask yourself, what does small group instruction look like for me this year? You need to map it out. What does independent reading look like for me this year? What does a mask break, if my building allow it, what does that look like for me this year in my room where I'm the one in control, where I'm the one setting the tone? And again, part of that is knowing your school's plan really, really well. Read the plan, attend the meetings if they're optional, and also try really hard to separate your opinion, obviously, from if you disagree with something that your school is doing. It's really hard to separate opinion from fact and opinion from profession, but you have to kind of leave that at the door and trust that the school knows what they're doing, or at least recognize that that's your, for lack of a better word, that is your paycheck and that's what you're expected to do. It's a very enmeshed thing to do, and I'm sure Dr. Blumenthal would agree that it's hard to separate that because we're in the work of children, and that is a feelings work, and we are in the profession of people. So it's very hard to see it black and white, but in this case, part of self-care will be to kind of put it in compartments. Recognizing that the year will be different, and also recognizing, you know, there was I think a question that was sent in, or someone had asked me about social emotional learning. You know, how could I possibly balance, we're expected to do all this social emotional learning and recognize trauma in kids, all of this. And I think as an educator, you're not going to be expected to do the social worker's job. What you need to do is what you can do in the terms of academics to support social emotional learning. So, you know, if you, or for the educators that are on tonight, you know that Maslow's theory, hierarchy of needs, right? Self-actualization and feeling of love and feeling of belonging, that has to come before Bloom's taxonomy. You know, higher thinking skills in terms of evaluating and analyzing and all the classroom stuff that we talk about. So if it's having more discussions and less multiple choice questions, that's okay. If it's asking kids to express their feelings about a story versus, you know, analyzing character, that's okay. Find opportunities where kids can bring their emotions to the table and feel. And there's plenty of places to feel in terms of literature, in social studies, maybe a little less in math, but there are opportunities where you can have kids express themselves, talk about themselves, and it can still be considered academics. And, you know, you are the masters of protocol. So I want to empower you tonight because you are the masters of September. September is all about routines, setting up norms, having classroom conversations with your kids about what does it look like for us, and setting up those classroom rules. And also for self-care, I urge you to set boundaries with your parents early on. Establish when you can be reached, how you can be reached, up to what time of day. Instead of waiting for that email to come from a parent at 11 o'clock at night, set the boundaries early. If you know that you can be reached, you know, if you don't answer by 5 p.m., they're only going to get an answer the next morning, that's okay. You have to set your own boundaries. There's also a lot in the responsive classroom. If you happen to be on social media, I urge you, maybe you want to take a look at some of the Twitter accounts with a lot of popular education accounts, because there's so much good stuff being shared right now in terms of recognizing that kids can't invade personal space, that there's different ways you can greet your students in the morning, right? Instead of the high five, maybe now it's, you know, like a wave in the air. And it's little things like that that you just have to kind of switch your thinking. I know I shared a lot on Corona Mora special posters that you can have in your classroom, how kids can greet each other. There are so many YouTube videos out there that I also shared on, you know, songs about social distancing and why we wear masks. And the why is really, really important too, is that, and I think it helps the teachers too. If you discuss the why we need to do something, you've now given the responsibility over to the child. So instead of being anxious that they're going to want to remove their mask because they don't understand why they have to wear it, take the time to discuss the why. It's their responsibility, that they are helping save lives, that they are helping stop the spread of the virus. If you empower the kids, I think also having that conversation, you'll be taking care of yourself, because you're going to create a community and a culture with your kids of a mutual understanding of this responsibility. And you'll be spending less time saying, pick up your mask, if you have an ongoing dialogue with the kids of why. And then I think one of the last things I want to talk about is just map out your day. Again, before school starts, think about I don't know, every building is going to be different in terms of, you know, whether it's going to be scheduled mask breaks or scheduled bathroom breaks, fresh air breaks, all of that. Map out your day. When do you want to accomplish what? Again, I think it still all falls under the topic of self-care, is that the more you can put in control for yourself and you can organize for yourself, the more successful you'll be. And hopefully your anxiety will go down in terms of, you know, what to expect, because at the end of the day, then you can know that you've been in control of something. And most teachers are type A personalities. And I think having an order and expectations for yourself is very comforting, actually, to a teacher amidst all this uncertainty. So I hope those were practical enough. I do share a lot on my Corona Mora account. I will be sharing a lot more. I urge you to follow, join the learning community that we've created. And that's it, I think. Oh, one more thing. Ask for help. There's no shame in asking for help, and don't wait till your frustration point. Go to your administrators, go to your colleagues, create think tanks together, because like I said in the beginning, and it brings back to my tip from the beginning, is that we're all novices. So nobody has an answer. And I think Dr. Blumenthal said it before, even talking it out, even if you don't have the answers, is healthy in itself. So create those opportunities to talk. And I'm sure your administrators will welcome the concerns. And even if they don't have the answers, hopefully they'll listen. That's it for me.
Hey, thank you very much, Racheli. Thank you very much, Dr. Blumenthal. Hey, we have a few questions that have come through, and please avail yourself. We still have a few minutes to take questions, so please write them in on the chat. We have a question here from a preschool teacher. The question is, how do I connect with kids without hugs, hand-holding, and with limited physical contact?
I actually just shared a really great poster on my account. I obviously can't share it right now. I don't have it ready, but it goes along with the responsive classroom. If you've ever seen any of those videos where there's a chart right outside the classroom and the kid gets to pick, they want a high five, they want a hug, they want a handshake before entering the room. And this one was actually modified for COVID, and it had all different things. It's like a silly dance in your place, or it's waving from afar, or it was like having a secret handshake where you don't touch. It's all about creative ways of showing affection and thinking differently.
Okay. Thank you. By the way, Racheli, somebody asked a question, is there a YouTube link for her songs?
If you go to @CoronaMora on Instagram, I share everything under the back to school highlight.
Okay, well, thank you. This one may be for you, Dr. Blumenthal, but a teacher wrote in, I have trouble sleeping with worry about the upcoming year. Is this normal? How do I know if I need help?
Okay, so I think it is actually not only normal, I think it's helpful to worry, because the worry motivates us to take action or to prepare, much along the lines of what Rose just mentioned. The things when you have to be concerned is when the anxiety rules you instead of you're ruling the anxiety. So certainly to be tense, I don't know about sleep, not being able to sleep at night, it's good to sleep, but if let's say some disrupted sleep and you take that anxiety and you think about it and you plan and you implement some of the ideas that have been just been suggested, then that's a very constructive anxiety. If you're just going in circles and finding yourself just unable to sleep without it becoming constructive, the good likelihood is that prior to even all this, you might have had a propensity to anxiety. It might have even been dormant, or you might have been aware of it, and this sort of like tipped the scale a bit. And that would be the point to ask for assistance, or to either try yourself to reduce anxiety or ask for assistance.
Okay. Anything else coming? Okay, we have a question here. How do I balance my time and effort needed to prepare additional material for two different forms of teaching and learning? I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, that's a very tough one, because I know some schools are assigning teachers just to brick and mortar and just to virtual. And then we have schools that are doing both. In a perfect world, I suggest teaming. Obviously, maybe this could be an idea that you can bring to your administrator in terms of sharing the load on a grade level so that you're not preparing everything all at once. If you are working in isolation, the best advice I could give is give yourself permission to maybe take it back a notch. I know that, like I said before, we are type A personalities teachers and we want perfect lessons from soup to nuts. It's okay to, adjust what you're doing so that maybe the brick and mortar and the virtual are not getting each what you would normally give 100%. Maybe they're getting a little bit less, and that's okay. But I would have to say collaboration with colleagues is probably the number one suggestion here, is that don't work in isolation.
Here's a question. I think you may have answered already, but what do I do if I feel my own health and that of my family is endangered by my physical presence in the classroom?
Okay. So like any fear, it has to be examined. And I think you have to take into consideration, look, we're not going to make believe. This is dangerous times and scary times. And especially, not only is this a highly virulent disease, but it's also one that we don't fully understand. And so there is, if you want to guarantee that you're not jeopardizing your own health, I don't think we can give it, unless any of us are just really living in a bubble. I don't think any of us can give that over. We're doing what we can. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think the most effective antidote to that kind of fear is to know that you are taking all possible precautions, humanly possible, following the direction of physicians, and you do have a better understanding of the disease, and that you're doing everything humanly possible. Now, if you have certain unique circumstances, if you or a member of your family is immune deficient, or you're caring for an elderly parent, then there are some unique circumstances that apply to you. You may have to take even some extra precautions, or you may have to discuss this with your administration in terms of the level of risk that you can take. But for the most part, that's what we're suggesting to people, is to look around you and to see. Look how careful you are. Look how everything's being hygienic, how kind of hygiene practices, how things are being sanitized, and that'll be the relief of the anxiety.
I have a similar question. It says, are there subsidized therapies available these days? Been so anxious and really want to be a good teacher.
Are there subsidized therapies?
I'm not sure what that means exactly. But...
Yeah. Well, if you mean that if it's based on what somebody can afford, sliding scale, or accessing insurance, most private practitioners, not all, but most private practitioners do not, in therapy, do not collect from insurance, only because the paperwork is so cumbersome that it's really not worth it for someone with just a singular practice. Now, the larger facilities, mostly the clinics, such as Ohel's Beis Ezra Beach Ninth Clinic, there's Jewish Family Services, there's Pride of Judea. There are many of these clinics that can afford, because they're subsidized, to provide therapy at a more affordable cost, or can collect from insurance. So that's a place to go. You get good treatment there. The disadvantage is you can't pick your therapist. You get assigned to a therapist, obviously based on what your needs are, but also based on who's available. So there is that's available, and nobody should, for monetary considerations, avoid getting the help that they need.
I should mention, Ohel has a treatment center both in Far Rockaway and in Brooklyn.
Right.
It's available.
And it's available, yes. And by the way, the trauma team does not provide psychotherapy, but if there is a sudden, potentially cataclysmic event of such concern, we are available for a trauma intervention, and that we're doing at no charge.
Questions? Anybody else have any questions on the chat? We have a few more minutes left. If not, maybe Dr. Blumenthal and Rachel, you have some last few important words to leave with our heroes as they start the new school year?
Right. Well, I think I'm going to reiterate what I said before. You're all very good at what you do. And we, for the most part, I think we are, I see some discussion coming in, but we have pretty consistent guidelines, certainly in some communities. And it probably, as is often the case with anything challenging, it's more doable than we give ourselves credit for it being. And I think we'll find very quickly that things will fall in place. I do want to mention one thing that maybe I should have mentioned earlier that's an important consideration. I'm already hearing from teachers as school opens up, it went incredibly well. The kids were just great. There is, in the beginning, and the novelty sometimes mobilizes children to be more cooperative or not to allow some of the more fears and dread get in the way. The true acid test, and again, I forget what Ms. Gross says, but the true acid test is going to be after the Yom Tovim, October, November, as we get more into routine, as it gets dark and it gets cold. That's when we may see some more of the stress of these past few months come up. So don't get, don't let your hair down. Just to those of us who still have hair, don't let your hair down because the very beginning is going so smoothly.
Yeah. Racheli, before you give your final words, a couple of questions came in I think we want to address. The question is, how do you suggest we help children deal with separation anxiety? I think both of you could probably handle that question.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I guess that falls more in my...
You didn't say what age, but...
Okay. Well, there's no question that when things seem uncertain, when there's a sort of dread or fear, it's harder to leave the home, especially if there is concern in the home, if there is a parent who is ill, or if there is some financial setback for that matter. Many people are suffering financially as a result of what's going on. So if there's an element of sort of gloom and doom in the home, it will be much harder for the child to leave and to separate. In most instances, once the child successfully does separate and does acclimate to school, it gets less and less. There are instances in today's world sometimes where children refuse to go to school because of something going on in school, most commonly today, bullying. So that's a differentiation you have to make when a child resists going to school.
We have another question that came in. I work at multiple schools with different levels of protection. How should I safely, reasonably, and comfortably teach between them?
I know that for us, we have multiple therapists that work in multiple buildings. And I think the best advice that I can give for people who are working in multiple buildings is learn how to protect yourself so that you can feel comfortable in knowing that, again, that back to that locus of control, right? You know that you're going to go to driver's ed and you're going to follow the rules and you're going to drive safely on the road. You can't control how other people are going to drive around you. But if you, do what you need to do to be a safe driver, then, you will feel comfortable behind the wheel. And I think that's probably what I would suggest to anyone working in multiple buildings is find out the best way to protect yourself to the level that you feel safe so that you can be successful in each of those buildings.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you both. Any last final words?
I think I say this every time is that educators have been proven we knew this all along. It was our best kept secret, but I think there's no secret that we are essential. We have our own superpowers. I know everyone on this chat is going to rise to the occasion, and I just want to wish everybody a successful, healthy, and efficient opening. And that's what I want to wish everyone.
Those are some really great words of encouragement. I echo those. I want to thank again Dr. Blumenthal, Racheli Gross. Thank all of you for attending and wish all of you once again Ksiva Chasima Tova. Have a great year. Be well, everybody.
To you too.
Bye, everybody. To you too. Have a great night.
Thank you.